Okay, so I'm going to move on then to the types of briefing information that you might expect. I always make a point of engaging with the client on this important aspect of the project. Sometimes it falls to the architect to introduce a measure of discipline when formulating the project brief and helping your client to differentiate between their wish list and a must-have list. Which is to be included in the project. You know, affordability comes into it. I've had many an interesting conversation with my clients when it comes down to affordability. So creating a project brief for a single residential development will not be too difficult for your client because it is usually very personal to them, and as such we'll be able to provide you with a very good account of what they require. But of course, inside of all that, depending on how they're fixed financially, will dictate whether they can, realize their goals and aspirations in that regard. But you, however, as the architect, may need to clarify certain aspects for your client and provide your views, some possible alternatives perhaps as to what might be more practical, might be more cost efficient perhaps, and even a better plan arrangement for that matter. This is where converting a wish list into reality becomes necessary to keep within the budget. But you'll get a handle on that when you start discussing finances with the client. On larger projects, of course, or a building is not familiar to your client, the situation will be different in that your client may not even know for sure what actual spaces are required, their sizes, etc. Specific activities within those spaces may be required and may require further design research, such as special spatial arrangements and options, etc. And that too is normal to a degree. Now, an example of this would be where we were working with our client on a new sports club, which had to be made accessible to the public. An example of this would be the funding that was being made available to them, and an agreement had to be reached for the size and use of shared use spaces for many of the internal spaces, not so much externally but mostly internally. Finalizing this project brief was a big investment of time. I would not commence with the concept design development stage, that is work stage 2, until the project brief was brought to a sensible conclusion, albeit the project brief continued to be amended and updated and refined to a certain extent during the concept design stage, because the project does evolve with the generation of the concept design development. Clarity begins to seep in, if not common sense sometimes. So the difference with what I have just cited as an example and a developer client engaging with you on a residential project will probably be vastly different. In my experience, the developer clients with a focus on residential projects or building types they are familiar with will most probably have a clear understanding of what is involved and what is required before they even engage you as their architect. They have a very good idea. At this point, I just want to give you a general overview of the briefing process and really taking ownership of that process as well. It is always tempting at some point during the project briefing process for enthusiastic architects to charge off and start producing detailed plan layouts with some elevational treatments ahead of the correct time. But really, this is usually a waste of time in my experience, because really you are designing in a vacuum because you haven't got all your ducks lined up. You haven't done your research at this stage. I've seen it happen in my own practice, and we've had to acquaint our enthusiastic architects and creatives with the correct process, and without, of course, quenching their eagerness and excitement. I mean, we're all excited about new projects. We like to get on with it, but we need to know what we're designing for. So you cannot sensibly start identifying a design solution or what even might be a design option without a sensible project brief and without your site research or your planning research in some order. My approach was to always seek to formalize the brief with the client as much as possible and sufficient for it to be realistic and sensible. This usually meant arranging a series of meetings to get the briefing job done. I mean, it is a job that has to be done, and you've got to make sure that you've got a brief, and so it falls into your remit to make sure a brief exists. Now, at my briefing meetings, I would have a sketch pad and pen and sketch out some ideas and indicative spatial arrangements for the client. And I may not be at these meetings on my own. I could be with an architect colleague of mine, or two maybe. But just to put some meaning into what was being discussed, this was always very advantageous to be able to discuss things with very loose sketches. And I keep these sketches as part of my briefing document also. Now, these are great opportunities for you to for you and indeed your client to take ownership of the project together. And I always found that that is a very useful thing to make sure that your client and you as the architect have a good handle on what's going to happen and that you've decided on things together. That's what I mean by taking ownership. Your client too will gather a great overview of what to expect when you actually get down to preparing some concept ideas in a more formal sense, and will be more inclined to understand where you're coming from because you've already done some initial discussions together. And why not? Bear in mind, your client may not be a single individual. Your client could be a committee or a trust whereby you are speaking and meeting with a number of interested players and having to answer numerous questions at the same briefing meeting. And you need to have a style to be able to manage that process, and maybe we can talk about that some other time, maybe in a webinar. That'd be great fun. I think, yes, we might do that. I always manage the process the same way, however, irrespective of how many people attend my briefing meetings. Now notice I've called them my briefing meetings because I've got a job of work to do. I don't let anybody else sort of hijack those meetings because I need to achieve what I've set out to achieve. You will find that informed clients and clients familiar with the type of buildings and use they require will probably have a simple briefing document maybe to give you from the outset. Now, I found that from a number of occasions, and it's very, very helpful indeed. Something to build with, something to test in the concept design stage as well. It might be a simple schedule of areas setting out the number of spaces they require. You might be presented with a specification document or a sample product or system the client have in mind, which of course you will incorporate as part of your client's briefing information, but naturally you will do some further research later in the design process to make sure this client information is appropriate and cost effective for the project compared to an alternative perhaps. You might be provided with some room data sheets setting out what needs to be included in various rooms and spaces, but your client is looking to you really to provide the most suitable arrangement and up-to-date information and arrangement of spaces as his architect or her architect or their architect, as the case may be. Now, a client seeking to reconfigure an existing building in addition to a new building element might have some initial thoughts and ideas to share with you, and whilst you will take this information on board, there will always be justification for testing these arrangements. In fact, that is usually expected from the client, and you too as the architect will naturally have to expect that your client will be giving their own views and thoughts, goals and aspirations, and really it is incumbent upon you as their architect to try and deliver those in the most pragmatic, sensible, cost-efficient way. That's your job as the architect, and that's what you're expected to do. Now, once I have a grip of the brief, and my client too, of course, I would then make a point of writing up the brief to formalize what has been discussed and agreed, to be included in the design and specification of the building, that is, and for the project generally. I would then submit the written project brief for the client's written approval of this written document.